One of the most common questions that we get asked during a Truto demo is, how many integrations does Truto support? And that's a perfectly valid question to ask because the whole point of using an integration platform is to support as many integrations as possible with the least amount of time and effort. But I think people miss an equally important question, and that is, can I build my own integrations in Truto? Because you spend a considerable amount of time, effort, and money in choosing an integration platform for your needs, only to realize later on that an integration might not be ever supported by that integration platform, or it might just take a really long time to get implemented. Now, you don't want the integration platform to dictate your integration roadmap. So that's why the integration platform that you select needs to be flexible, it needs to be extensible and customizable based on your needs. So in this video, I'll show you how Truto was built from the ground up to be the most flexible, customizable, and extensible integration platform out there. We are going to build a Pipedrive integration. We are going to connect a Pipedrive account to it, and I'll show you how you can make the API calls against it. This is the same process that the Truto team uses every single day in order to build integrations for all of its customers. This is Rupendra. I'm the co-founder and CTO of Truto, and you're watching the Truto Masterclass. So let's first start by understanding what integrations are within Truto. Integrations are one of the core building blocks of the Truto platform, and they are basically the representation of a product's API, right? So I have the Pipedrive integration here, and this basically tells Truto what sort of authentication Pipedrive uses, what are the different authorization headers I can set, what's the base URL of the API, and what sort of pagination Pipedrive uses, what is the rate limit handling and stuff like that. And most importantly, it tells Truto that these are the different resources that the Pipedrive API supports. Once the Pipedrive integration is built, you can go ahead and start connecting your customers' Pipedrive accounts to Truto. This is how you use the Pipedrive integration to fetch the data from your customers' Pipedrive accounts. And this connection is basically called an integrated account. So every integrated account is related to an integration. Now that we know how integrated accounts and integrations work together, let's take a look at how you can create your own integrations within Truto. Truto already provides a lot of integrations that you can directly install and use out of the box. But for the sake of this guide, we'll be creating the Pipedrive integration from scratch and using the same process that the Truto team uses in order to create new integrations for all of their customers. So let's start by clicking the Create Integration button. It's going to show you a big form and it's split into multiple sections. So we'll tackle each one of them step by step. Let's start with the basic details first. We'll need a label for the integration. So this is the name that is visible to your end customers, and we'll just name it Pipedrive Demo. Then we need an identifier. This will be used in various places within the product. So this will just name it as Pipedrive Demo. Pipedrive already exists as an integration within Truto, so this is just to prevent collisions with an existing integration. Then we'll set the category. I'm just gonna select CRM. Logo, you just need to point to an existing logo URL. So I have that handy with me, so I'm just gonna use this. And icon is just like the smaller representation of that logo, which is used in other places. You can ignore the is beta. Then we have the sharing dropdown, so you can choose if you want to make this available to all of the Truto customers, or other customers can ask to use it, or it's strictly for your own team. So we are going to set to only for your team. So this is going to make the integration available just for our Truto account. And I'm going to click save. So as you can see, like the logo has been picked up and we have the basic details ready to use. Now let's set up the authentication for Pipedrive. I'm going to click edit and I'll scroll down to the authentication section. Pipedrive supports to OAuth 2.0. So we need a client ID, client secret, and a few other things like the token host and scopes that are required. We also support other authentication methods depending on the integration. So if you need, you can use API key and OAuth 2.0 client credentials as well. So for OAuth 2.0, we need the client ID, which we are going to get from the developer hub of Pipedrive here. So I'm just going to the Pipedrive developer hub and I'm going to create an app. This process will be different for different integrations, so you'll really have to figure it out based on the documentation of that product. So I'm just going to create a private app for Pipedrive. I'm going to give it a name here. So I'm going to say Truto demo, and it needs a callback URL. So I'm just going to go back into this interface and I'm going to copy this and I'm going to paste it here. HTTPS. I'm just making a few changes here because it's running on my local machine. But in your case, it will just say API.Truto.1. I'm going to click save. And here I'm going to select the scopes that I'm interested in. Some products provide this, some products don't really have like very fine-grained scopes. So this is depending on your use case. So I'm just going to select contacts because that's the one that will demo in this guide. I'm just going to select full access, right? And I'm going to copy the client ID and client secret. I'm just going to leave the param names to their default values. And we need two more things. We need the authorization host and the token host. Authorization host is the URL that you'd hit when someone clicks connect Pipedrive within Truto interface. And token host is the URL that you'll hit to get the access token in exchange for the authorization code. So to get that information, I'll again go into the documentation of Pipedrive. So they have a documentation around OAuth 2.0 and how it works for their particular product. I'm just going to go into OAuth authorization here. And if I just scroll down, looks like this is the authorization URL. So I'm just going to copy this and I'm going to paste it here. I'm going to leave the authorization part as it is because it seems to match whatever we already have. And this is the callback URL and this is the token host. So I'm just going to copy this and I'm going to paste it here. Looks like both of them are the same. Then I'll add the scopes. So to get the scopes, I'll just go back to this interface. I'll click scopes and permission. And looks like we need base because that is by default added to all of the integrations. So I'm just going to add base here. And if we just scroll down, there should be contacts full. Yeah, contacts read and contacts full. I'm just going to take this and I'm going to paste it here. Right. I'm going to leave the scope separator as it is because I think space is the scope separator. Then I'm going to quickly go back to OAuth authorization again, and I'm going to quickly check for one thing, which is how do we get the access token and how should the client ID and client secret be sent in order to get the access token. So as you can see, to execute the request, your request has to be authenticated via HTTP basic auth with the client ID and client secret. So if we go back into this interface and if you look at this dropdown, OAuth token request authorization format, it's set to header, which basically means it will use the basic auth in order to send the client ID and client secret. There is also body because some integrations also support the client ID and client secret to be sent in the body request in the actual payload of the post request. So depending on your use case and the OAuth app, you can actually change between these things. I'm just going to leave it at header. And if we go back into the interface, it says application x form URL encoded. So I'm just going to leave that to form. We'll leave the other things as it is. You can add more authorization URL parameters if required. You can add extra token parameters if required. And you can also add refresh token parameters if required. So these parameters will be sent in the requests that we make from Truto to either generate the authorization URL or to generate the new tokens or to generate refresh tokens. So I'm just going to leave everything else as it is and I'm going to click save. So now this is a good time to go ahead and test the authentication for this particular integration. So the first thing that you need to do after creating an integration is install it. So I'm just going to install it in all the three environments. Right now that the integration is installed, I'll just go into the integrated account. So I'm going to click connect account. I'm going to enter a tenant ID here, and let's start connecting the account. So this is the Pipedrive demo integration. I'm going to click connect, and this is the OAuth screen. It tells you what scopes you're asking for. I'm going to click allow and install here. And if everything goes well, you should see a connection successful link. I'm just going to quickly close this and click done here. As you can see, we have an integrated account. So out of that integration, we have now connected a single Pipedrive account. You can have multiple Pipedrive accounts connected as well. So you just click connect accounting and you can connect any other Pipedrive account. But if you go into this, it's gonna like show you all the information of the of that particular integration. And as you can see, we don't have any unified or proxy APIs here, and we'll quickly fix that. But other things like the OAuth tokens and stuff have been fetched properly. And now that we have all of the connection working as expected, let's go ahead and actually add the resources that we are interested in to this integration. I'm going to switch to the integration details page, and I'm going to click edit. I'm going to scroll down to the authorization section here. So now we have the access tokens that, the Pipedrive API sends us after the OAuth connection is done. So we are going to add this into the actual API calls that we make. So that's where the authorization section comes in. By default, we support some of the basic ones like bearer auth, basic, and we also support custom header where you can add any sort of custom header that you need. So we'll just select bearer auth because that's what Pipedrive uses. I'm just going to quickly show it that in the documentation. If you go to the using the tokens section here, it says that you can add the access token in every request in the authorization header, which is set as bearer. So we're going to go back into the integration screen, and we basically need a way to reference the access token that we got for that particular integrated account. If you look at the help text here, it says for OAuth 2.0, use this placeholder OAuth.token.access token. So I'm just going to copy that. I'm going to paste it here. So one thing to note here in this interface, in the integrations detail interface, and pretty much at every other interface, you'll see something called as variables enabled for various input fields. So even if you go to authentication, it says variables enabled. So in these fields, you can use the handlebars template kind of syntax to refer to things within the integrated account or within the connection process. So when I say OAuth.token.access token, it's the part to the actual access token within the integrated account. So if I just quickly go back to the integrated account, you'll see that we have a variable section here. So this is the data that is stored inside each integrated account. And if I click edit, it's going to show the complete data that is stored in this OAuth attribute. We don't actually send the access token back to the UI, so that won't be visible here, but access token will be there under this token object. If I want, I can add more variables here as well. So if I just say foo bar and I click save, it's going to be saved with this particular connection, right? So you can refer to this in any other place within the integration UI. So that takes care of the authorization part of it. Next, we are going to set up the base URL and headers. So I'll just go to the base URL section here. And to get the base URL, I'll go into the Pipedrive documentation. You can see that their base URL is something like this, companydomain.pipedrive.com. And after that, they have a /API route for each one of their APIs. So I'm just going to copy this, right? And I'm going to paste it here. Now, this obviously isn't a correct URL, right? So we'll need the company domain name from the customer here, right? This is not something that we can hard code into the integration. So I'm just going to use the same placeholder syntax, and I'm just going to say subdomain here, right? Now this subdomain needs to be passed from the customer, right? In order to do that, we can click the variables section here. So this is something that we skipped in the initial part of the guide. And you can add variables that we can ask the customers, right? So I just click the add variable button here, and I'm going to give it a name. The name will be the same as what I used in the URL. So subdomain. We can give a label. So I'm just going to say Pipedrive subdomain, right? And this is the thing that will show up for the end customer. The type will be just text. There's no default value for it. So you can just give a placeholder as well. So I'm just going to say Acme. Format, you can just leave it as it is. It's a required field, and you can add pattern if you need. So it's a regex pattern, and you can add transforms as well if you want to make it lowercase, uppercase, or whatever it is. And then you can add a help text. So you can say you can find this in your browser URL when you log in to Pipedrive. If your URL is something like acme.pipedrive.com, enter Acme into this field. You can also add a documentation link of your own. So if you have a dedicated help guide around Pipedrive, you can just paste the link here. And now that we have the base URL and headers out of the way, I'm just going to add the headers that are required usually. So I'm just going to say accept application JSON. And let me just copy that. Content type as well. And I'm just going to add a user agent here. Sorry, it will be Truto. So these are the headers that will be sent with each and every request. So you can add the common headers here. And I'm going to close this and close this. And then I'm going to add the first ever resource that we want to support, which is basically the contacts, right? Now I'll have to go into the API reference and I'll have to check where the contacts are. I think they are called persons in this context. So you can see that the URL is v1/persons. So I'm just going to copy that. I'm going to name this persons, right? You can see that we have the basic CRUD operations here, right? But if you want, you can also add custom methods, right? And I'm just going to remove this custom method for now. Let's first read the contacts. So I'm just going to add a list endpoint, which will return a list of persons from Pipedrive. So as soon as I check that, it will show me what method to use, which is the get, and I'm gonna add the path from the documentation. So it's /API v1persons, right? I'm gonna leave all these things as it is for now, just to test out the things real quick. And I'm gonna click save, right? Now the integration is saved. If you remember, we added a new variable here, which is not really added to our existing integrated account. So to fix that, what we'll do is we'll reauthorize this connection. I'm just going back into the integrated account and I'm going to click reauthorize, and I'm going to click get connection link again. And now it's asking the subdomain. So in our case, it is truto.pipedrive.1. So I'm just going to enter Truto here, and I'm going to click connect. So the app is already installed. I'm just going to click continue to the app. The connection is successful. And now when I go back to this page, you can see that the subdomain has been entered by the customer, right? And this subdomain will be referred in the proxy API. So whatever resources you add in this section here, right? These will be visible under the proxy API section in the Pipedrive integrated account. So we'll click list. We can try out all the integration, all the API endpoints from the interface. I'm just going to click call API. And if everything works as expected, it's going to return some data. So these are all the people in my CRM right now. Now, if you notice something, we have the data usually for list endpoints. The Truto API returns a result and a next cursor. Result is an array of resources. But if you look at our result, it is actually, filled with just one object and the complete API response. What we need instead is this result attribute to map to the data attribute here, because that's where the actual API response is, right? So the data is a list of objects. Now this is what we need. In some APIs, the data will be just returned as an array, so everything should just work as it is. But in this case, Pipedrive is sending us the data in this specific JSON format. So we need to actually map to this data here. Now we can quickly do that by going to the integration details page again. I'll click edit and I'll go down to resources. I'll go to persons. Now you see something called as response path here. So I'm just gonna say data, because that's the attribute which we need to refer to in order to get a list of objects, right? And if it was like nested deeply, you could use like a normal path notation here, right? And if it's already an array, you can leave it blank, right? So data, and I'm gonna click save. I don't need to reconnect the account. I'll just click call API again. And now we should get some clean data here. So we get the result attribute as an array of objects, which is what we need, right? So this is like the basics of adding a resource. Now let's handle the pagination. So if we go into the Pipedrive documentation, this is the API that we are calling, get all persons. Now if you look at the query parameters, it says that we can give a start query parameter and a limit query parameter as well. So this is basically an offset based pagination format here. If we again like go into the main documentation, and we go into the pagination section here, they support two different sorts of pagination depending on the API version here. So if we go into the offset based pagination, this is by default enabled, I think, for all the V1 endpoints. So we're just going to use that as the default since most of the API endpoints are V1 right now. So I'm going to set this up in the Pipedrive integration here. I'm going to click edit and I'll go into the pagination section and I'll select offset based pagination. So we have a total record path as well. Like if the API returns the total number of records, we can refer that. Let me just check if it is there. It isn't there. So I'm just gonna select the start and limit. So the offset key is start and the default offset will be 0. And this is the limit. So limit will be just called limit. And we can also set a maximum limit here. So it seems to be 500 in this case. So I'm just going to go in and paste that. And I'm going to add the pagination to the query parameter. So this takes care of the pagination part of it. So I'm just going to click save. And I'm going to go back into the integrated account. And I'm going to call the API again. So let me just collapse the result. So there are no next cursor because I don't think we have enough data to paginate. So let's quickly try with, a smaller limit. So I'm going to click call API again. So now we have a single data and we have a next cursor here. So if I just copy this whole thing and I paste it here, the first result was ID1. So I'm just going to call this. I'm going to get ID2 and, I can just keep calling this and keep getting the data, right? So this is how you handle pagination within Truto. Next, we'll quickly add the individual get endpoint And we'll also add a create endpoint just to have all the CRUD endpoints within Truto. So I'm just going to go back into the Pipedrive integration again, and I'm going to go into resources, and I'll click get. So get is similar, to your list, but it just returns a single resource. I'm going to go into the documentation, and I'll just click back here. So we have the persons, get details of a person is the API. So I'm just going to copy this and go into the integration details page. I'm going to add API in front of it. Now we can use a placeholder here called ID. So this ID will be sent by the customer while making the API call, right? And we'll just check the response path later. We'll leave all the other things as it is. And we'll also add the create endpoint, right? So let's go into the documentation again, add a person. So it's pretty much the same thing. So let's go back into the integration and copy the API endpoint. I'll paste it here. I can select the body format. So this will be JSON or any other thing that you want. This is the default body that you can add. We don't want to send any default data as part of this request. So I'm just going to leave it empty. And there are some other options that you can go through. And I'm just going to click save here. Now if I go back into the integration, I'll just click this small refresh button here. So now we have all the 3 endpoints that we just added. I'll click get, and I can pass the ID that we were talking about. So it gets added to the path. And I'm going to call the API, and it's returning the data. And just like before, it's returning a JSON, but we are actually interested in this data attribute here because that's the actual object. We don't want all these success true and stuff like that. So let me just go back into the integration and fix that real quick. I'll just go into persons, and response path will be data. Just going to save that, and I'm going to call the API again. And now we are just getting the information that we are interested in. So this is the get endpoint, and let's try the create endpoint as well. Let's quickly go into the documentation and see what is required to create a contact. So it looks like name is the only thing that we need. Okay, let's just try with name here. Testing from the API. Let's call the API. And again, the data is created. Looks like we have it. And again, it's coming under data. So let's quickly fix that. Let's go into persons, and response path will be data. I'm gonna click save. I'm just gonna call this API again. And as you can see, we are just getting the data as it's supposed to be. So 11 is the one that we just created. I'm just going to copy that ID, paste it here, call the API. And yeah, so this is how you can add all the CRUD endpoints to an integration within Truto. Next, we'll quickly go over all the other bells and whistles that we provide within Truto for an integration. So these are the sections that we'll look at before. So we have a query params section. Here you can add query parameters that you want to go with every request to the underlying API. You can also specify the query array format that the underlying API uses. So there are various ways of sending a set of values for a query parameter. So you can select the one that Pipedrive supports. Pagination we already looked at. Then we'll look at rate limiting. So we have different options here to specify the rate limit handling. So let's quickly go into the Pipedrive documentation and see how they are specifying the rate limits. So if you go into this and scroll down, so they send you 3 different headers. So one is the limit, the number of requests that you can make in a given time window. How many of that is remaining? So how many requests can you make in that time window? And the final thing is reset, which tells you when that rate limit quota kind of gets reset for that particular time window. So we can kind of take this and you can normalize that into a common header format. So if we go into the integration page, we have three different things here. So one is, how do we know that we are being rate limited by the underlying integration? So most of the integrations return a status code of 4 to 9. But if the integration doesn't follow that, follow the standard, then you can specify a custom JSONata expression here. So JSONata is a small expression language that we use to handle these kind of things. So you can use that to kind of return a Boolean value here and tell Truto that we are actually being rate limited, right? So you can access the response headers that the API is sending and the status code that the API is sending in this particular JSONata expression. We're just going to leave it as default because Pipedrive sends a 4 to 9. Then we have the rate limit headers expression. So by default, we map the three headers that we saw here into our own common format. So to do that, we basically need a JSONata expression which will return a limit, remaining, and reset object. So let's do that real quick. So I'm just going to say, I'm just going to return an object and we have to return limit. So that you'll find it under headers dot x rate limit dash limit. That's the one, right? Then we have x rate limit remaining. So I'm just gonna press comma and remaining, and I'm just gonna add it to headers. And then we have reset, which is basically the number of seconds after which the quota kind of gets reset. All right, so that's that. And so this is how you map the underlying rate limit headers into a common rate limit header within Truto, right? Once Truto gets this object, it will kind of set the headers appropriately. And then we have a retry after expression. So this is basically when you do get rate limit, most of the APIs set a retry after header. So we just directly check for that and set the retry after header within the Truto response. But some integrations might not follow it. So we have given a JSONata expression option here for that as well. So that's pretty much it on the rate limit headers. So I'll just collapse this. Next, we look at error expressions. So error expressions is again a JSONata expression that you can use to kind of coerce certain status codes into an actual error. So what happens is most of the times the APIs just return the proper status code. So let's say if you're not authenticated, it returns a 401. If you're forbidden to access a certain resource, it returns 403. But some integrations don't really follow this. So they send a 200 status code for all the responses. Then you have to kind of check like some attribute in the response to kind of see if the request succeeded or failed, right? So Slack is a good example of this. So if I just open the Slack documentation, so they return a 200 for all the responses, but then you have to actually check the error response, right? You have to check this OK attribute and you have to check the error response for it. So what we have done is, if I go into the Slack integration real quick, and if I go into the error expression, we have actually written a complete JSONata expression, which kind of maps this, 200 response into an actual error for the API. So you can refer this if you need more information around how the error expression works, right? Now, after this, we can look at actions. So sometimes you need to do certain steps after an account is connected, probably like, generate a label, like a human readable label for you to kind of see within the Truto UI, or there might be some organization ID or something that we need to send with each request to the underlying integration. So that's where the post install steps come in. So these steps are executed after, an account gets connected, right? After we get the access token. So we'll do a quick post install step, which will add a label to each and every integrated account that gets connected, right? So I'll just go into the Pipedrive documentation and we will look at the users resource here real quick. I'm going to get the current user data. So let's quickly add this endpoint and see if it's working for us. So before we add the post install step, let's just add a users resource, right? And since it's a /me resource, I can just add a custom method here. I'm just going to call it me, right? And I'm going to paste it here and do this, right? And let's see if the response path is data. So let's just add that. And I'm going to click save. I'll just quickly go back into the integrated account. And I'm going to try it out. And since it's a since it's a custom method, you have to make a post request to it, right? And this is the URL that you'll call. I'm just going to call the API, and it's returning the data as we expect. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the name as the label along with probably the company name, right? So let's do that real quick. Let's click edit. I'm going to go into actions. I'm going to click run post install steps. So there are various kinds of steps that you can run, but the first thing that we need to do is make a request. So I'm going to select proxy API. I'm going to select users, and I'm going to click me. So this is the step. It's going to fetch the data, and then we are going to transform the response that we are getting. So if I call this again, we are getting this data. The attribute is name and company name, right? So I'm just going to go here and I'm going to return an object called label. So I'm going to say $.name, and I'm just going to add a pipe operator, and I'm going to say $.company name, right? Now we have transformed the response from this request into this format, and then I'm going to add a step to kind of update the context, right? So basically what it's doing is it's going to fetch the current user's data. It's going to create a label out of it. You can also add more information here. So if I just do foo_bar, it's going to be added to the variables, right? And I'm going to update the context, which is basically the variables within the integrated account. And I'm going to click save. And you can, to test it out, you can actually reauthorize the connection, or in this case, we can just tell it to run the post install steps. If I just request that and I refresh the integrated account, you can see that a label has been added, right? So if there is a label attribute within the variable section, it's going to show up as labels within the UI. And you can see that we also have foo_bar added because that's what we added as a static information. And if I go back to the integrated accounts, it's going to show the label along the integrated account, right? So that's the post install actions. I think we have pretty much covered most of the things that are required to create an integration. For the placeholder documentation, you can refer to this library that we have created. It's called replace placeholders. And it basically tells you all the syntax that you can use within the placeholder within Truto, right? So you can refer to this, and I think that's pretty much it. This is how we have created a Pipedrive integration from scratch, and yeah, so you can also add more resources if you need, and that should pretty much, help you make use of Truto's flexible infrastructure to kind of build your own integrations. We are excited to see what you build, and thank you.